Welcome to the Eferia TechCast, where we bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. I'm your host, Ezekiel Iferia, and today we are joined by Dr. Rahul Prasad, an applied physicist with a PhD from Yale who spent decades at the forefront of scientific innovation, including work on the National Ignition Facility at Lawrence Livermore. Dr. Rahul, I am excited and honored to welcome you to the show. Thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Ezekiel, for having me.
It's truly an honor, having you as a guest on the show. Dr. Prasad, let's get things started. You earned a PhD in applied physics from Yale and spent decades at the forefront of scientific innovation, including work on the National Ignition Facility at Lawrence Livermore. So I'd like to know what drew you from, the laser lab to the leadership of non-profits serving marginalized children in India, and that risk youth in South Africa. So was there a specific moment that shifted your focus?
Thank you for that question, Ezekiel. It wasn't really one moment, it was a continuing change, which started, about 15 years ago when I was first asked to volunteer to help with Butterflies USA, which is the organization that raises money for children in India. A friend of mine asked me if I would help translate a video. And then as I translated the video for him, he said, "I like the sound of your voice. Will you narrate the video for me?" And I said, "Well, I've never narrated anything before." But he said, "Don't worry, I can walk you through it. Come to my studio, we'll do the recording, we'll do the narration." I did that, and so on and so on. And so I kept getting more and more involved, recording videos for them every year, then joining their board, and then being asked to chair the board. And with that, I started to get the sense that the work I was doing, raising money for these children, was more fulfilling to me as a person, that made me feel better utilized, if you will, in service of humanity. And so that is when I decided that I was going to shift from doing this work part-time to becoming full-time in this and giving up the full-time work as a physicist.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing that with us, Rahul. So you are currently writing a book called Impact
Yes.
Shift. So tell us about it. What does that phrase mean to you?
Well, first off, it is actually written and published and is available on Amazon and other retail outlets. So anybody, one of our listeners who wants to, can feel free to get a copy. Impact shift to me means the change of the direction of your life. So you're making an impact in one field, whatever the field is. And for whatever reason you feel like it's time to make a shift and do something and make an impact in a different field. And so Impact Shift, the book, is a story of my life and my shift from physics to philanthropy. And I offer in the book tips and tricks and little ways in which you can, one, decide if the time is right for you to make this change, and two, if you decide to make this change, how to. It's a guide that helps you understand how you can make this shift without it becoming a catastrophic change, which of course is something which is very hard for most of us to like.
Thank you for sharing that with us. So you've worked on some of the most complex scientific instruments ever built. So how does a physicist mindset, the way you approach problems like fusion, ignition, how does it translate to solving social challenges like poverty, education, or youth empowerment?
I think the scientific method is a very useful way to understand and solve just about any challenge. Because the first thing that we do when we come up with a challenge in science is we look at the situation. We try to gather as much data as we can to see what the situation is and what led to the creation of the situation that we are trying to solve. And that is a way which you can use in humanitarian problems as well. If you look at the problem as how did we get here? What caused this to happen? That helps find out how you can address the problem. So one of the things that I've realized with that is that when it comes to helping children, the best way to do it is to show them the possibilities of what is available out there. Because brains are not given to children based on their parents. based on the money their parents have or the power their parents have. Brains are given evenly, and it's utilizing that brain which is different for people who have the opportunity to be able to go to school, to be able to study, to be able to understand what the possibilities are, versus those that cannot do that. And so it's the same scientific method that I applied to come up with the solution.
Rahul, you co-founded a company in your early career.
Yes.
You've advised venture capital firms and you now lead non-profit boards. So how do you think about risk differently in a scientific experiment versus a philanthropic investment?
I think risk is very different. In a scientific experiment, mostly, unless you're doing something which is very dangerous, there is no risk to life, to human life. Whereas when you're working in philanthropy, when you're working with children, when you're working with marginalized youth in particular, the risk is much greater. You have to be very careful. And this is one of the reasons why my approach to this is to raise money in the US, to provide money to the people that are doing the work in India and in South Africa, and let them decide what works for the children in their countries. Because I don't understand what the local situation is in India. I don't live in India. I don't live in South Africa. I am not the expert of how they should be solving the problems that affect the marginalized children in those areas. So I try to make our organizations just go out and raise money. We tell the story with passion because we believe in it. And we expect that people will respond to that and provide us with the funds that we can then give to the charities in India, who can then do the work independently of us, because they're the ones that are best suited to decide what works and what doesn't.
So, Dr. Rahul, which is harder to measure success in?
Well, I think it depends on how you define success. If you define success as I set out to do this, to build this widget, and success is that I built the widget, that's very easy to measure, I agree. But if the success metric is how does this widget change the lives of somebody, it is exactly the same thing as measuring success in the nonprofit world. Where I see us succeeding, and I think we succeed very well, is we now, in both of the organizations that I support, have students that have graduated through the program and then have come back to work in the program to help the next generation of students. That to me is a strong measure of success, because they were so thrilled with the opportunity they got that they now want to come back and help the next generation.
You have been an award-winning volunteer leader for Yale University for nearly 3 decades, serving as chair of both the Graduate School Alumni Association and the Yale Alumni Association Board of Governors. So, what has your experience with alumni and academic institutions taught you about building communities that last?
That's an excellent question, Ezekiel. And I think what it has taught me is that if you are able to show people what their commonality is, what their common points are, rather than what their differences are, you can create a community that will last. And in the case of alumni, it is fairly straightforward because there is one common bond. We all went to the same university. But it is also true in your neighborhood. We all live in the same place. It is also true. And if we identify what makes us together, what makes us look alike, rather than what makes us look different, we can create communities that last. And we can do this anywhere in the world.
Okay, all right. You describe yourself as an avid photographer, explorer, traveler, and adventurer. So how do those pursuits outside the lab and the boardroom, how do they feed your work in science and service?
So I've always been very curious. And that is why I got into physics in the first place. I wanted to figure out how things work. I
Mhm.
remember as a child, I was 5 years old, I got my first bicycle, and the first thing I did with the bicycle was take my father's toolbox and take it apart. Because I wanted to see how does it work.
Mhm.
Of course, it took me a week to put it back together again, with a little help from my father, but I did. And then I had a bicycle that worked. And it taught me something about myself. And that is the reason. And photography came about because I like to capture the moments. I like to capture what I see. I like to tell a story. And that was the reason why I got into photography. And it's very similar to what I did. I used that work in photography actually in my early career in science, building optical instruments and optical ways of looking at things. And so it has been a constant marriage of the two things. And my curiosity is what has led me to be an explorer and an adventurer. And, you know, if you're a scientist, you're always at the bleeding edge of technology. You're at the cutting edge. So you're an adventurer. You are an explorer. You're exploring a new frontier. And I like to do that in the world as well, because I learn more about different people, different cultures, if I can visit. Sitting at home is harder to do that. That's sort of how I like to look at it. And it gives me a lot of satisfaction to be able to understand how things work, because then when I see a problem, there is a chance that I can find a solution for this problem.
So, you have contributed to the National Ignition Facility, a place where we literally chase the dream of fusion energy. So, what did that work teach you about persistence?
I think the biggest lesson that it taught me, Ezekiel, is if you want to succeed, you have to try and try again. Because when you start on something, particularly an experiment or a technology or building a gadget that nobody has made before, you don't know what problems, what challenges will occur when you start on it.
Mhm.
And every time you come up with a challenge, you have to view it as an opportunity to learn more rather than to view it as a stumbling block and say, that's it, I give up, I'm going home.
Mm.
And so it really has taught me that, and if you try and you try to do it differently, you try a different technique, you try a different approach, you talk to people to see how you might want to do something differently, you can succeed. And that's all about persistence. Giving up is the easiest thing to do. You reach a point which is challenging, which is difficult, you just say, that's it. I don't need to do this anymore. I walk away from it. That's easy. But sticking around, trying to figure out what created the problem, how can you fix it, then trying to apply the fix, see if it works, that's the tough one. And if you do it, you get success. Because unless you're incredibly lucky, you're not going to succeed the first time you try anything.
Okay. Okay. So, how can one differentiate between a failed experiment and one that's just not there yet?
That's another very, very difficult question to answer. It is not really, I don't think it's really possible to, without trying a different approach, to know whether the problem is that you didn't do everything in the way you should have done it. In other words, it's a failed experiment, it can be fixed. Or what you try, what we know, won't solve it because we don't have the technology to do what is required. I mean, if you think about human beings trying to go to the moon, if we had tried to launch a rocket not in 1969, but in 1869, you could have tried for as long as you liked. Everything that was required to be developed in order for that to happen wasn't there yet. And so I think the way to figure it out is to try it a few times with different approaches, and then try to analyze, is this because there is some fundamental technology that is missing? Or is it something that is in the nature of the way in which we are addressing the problem that is causing it to fail?
Okay. Okay. That is truly interesting and insightful response, Rahul. You are the president of Butterflies USA and chairperson of Amandla Development. What's a recent moment from your work with these organizations that reminded you of why you do this?
So, with Amandla, it happened recently when USAID decided that they were going to stop funding us. And that took away a significant fraction of the funding that we had. And the reason why I got energized by this is because when I was speaking to the people in South Africa, they took it not as this is such a horrible thing, we are going to not be able to function, we should just shut up shop and go away. They said, this is a new challenge. Let us go out and find alternative sources of funding. And that to me was such a remarkable thing in the face of adversity. And they said, We were willing to work with less pay, we'll do more. Let's try to continue the good work, which energized me to go out and try to raise more money. And I'm happy to report that we've actually been successful in continuing to stay alive. We have operated ever since then. And it looks like by the end of 2026, we might again be poised for growing. So it was a setback, but we had, because of the I think the guts and the persistence of the people on the ground, we're actually going to be able to continue the good work.
Rahul, you have a rare blend of expertise in physics, venture advising, humanitarian leadership. So maybe for a young engineer or scientist listening right now who wants to, who wants their career to matter beyond the technical contribution, what advice would you give?
First advice I would give is explore different things. If you want to do something which matters beyond whatever science or engineering or technology field you're working in, look outside of that field. Look into the possibilities for humanitarian work. You might be excited by helping children, the next generation, like I am. That might not be what you want. Maybe you want to work with an organization that builds houses for people that have no homes. That's another thing you could do. There are so many different humanitarian needs today, so many different causes that need people who are talented, people who have the energy, people who have the passion to get involved with, that it's not something that you need to worry about any particular area. So while I would love for you to support the organizations that I work with, I would be very happy if you supported any organization.
All right. Great piece of
And
advice.
start doing it in your free time. Start doing it in your free time. Do a little bit at a time.
Okay, I hope that advice is valuable to the listener in a position where they need to hear this. So you have had a decades-long career that spans research, national security science, entrepreneurship, global development, seed. So what's still on your bucket list to learn or explore?
There's so much that I want to learn and explore. The workings of the human mind fascinate me. I am probably not going to go out and start working in a company or in a university trying to do that, but I do try to enrich myself by reading about it, by reading the research which is going on around the globe. So that is one thing which I'm passionate about. I am so excited about the second landing on the moon. I think that's an absolutely amazing thing because I watched the first landing on the moon, and that's what sealed the deal for me to join the legions of scientists and technologists. And so I was waiting with bated breath to see the second landing and to see how we parlay that into the future. And potentially, even hopefully, in my lifetime, get to see the first landing on Mars.
Rahul. So you you moved from studying the physics of stars to helping children and youths see new possibilities for their own futures. What does innovation truly mean to you now? So I like to see things from your perspective on the meaning of the word innovation.
The way I look at innovation is thinking outside the box. All of us can think about anything, whether it's physics, whether it's technology, whether it's humanitarian work. We can think about the way it has been done before. And that's easy to do, but that's not innovative. To me, innovative is thinking outside of that, to think creatively, to think differently, to come up with a creative solution to an existing problem, a more elegant solution to an existing problem, something that reduces the pain of doing something which you have to do every day. That is innovation. Working with children so that the next generation is equally as educated as this generation is innovation, because there are so many children that could get left behind if we don't work to show them the possibilities and give them the opportunities to learn. And that to me is innovative because we haven't done that. We tend to take the approach that, like Darwin said, this is survival of the fittest. Well, we leave a lot of people behind that way. And I think that we should be different. We're humans. That should be our hallmark.
So to wrap things here for our listeners, so who actually wants to go learn more about your work with Butterflies USA, Amandla Development, or just go check out your book, Impact Shift. So where is the best place for them
Yeah.
to go?
The best place would be the starting point is my website. It's rahulrprasad.com, just my name.com. And that's where I describe my work in Amandla. I describe my work in Butterflies. You can see my photos and you can see the stories behind my photos. And you can find links to go to these places, as well as, of course, you'll learn about my book and how to buy it.
So Rahul, it has been such an interesting and insightful conversation with you here today, and I am indeed honored to have you as a guest on the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ezekiel, for having me. Take care.